bathroom, the only one she was allowed to use. In the next building, under an elegant domed copper roof, a 10.5-foot marble statue of Jesus stood, arms spread wide, holding court over what was once the main entrance of Hopkins. No one in Henrietta's family ever saw a Hopkins doctor without visiting the Jesus statue, laying flowers at his feet, saying a prayer, and rubbing his big toe for good luck. But that day, Henrietta didn't stop. She went straight to the waiting room of the gynecology clinic, a wide open space, empty, but for rows of long, straight-backed benches that looked like church pews. "I got a knot on my womb," she told the receptionist. "The doctor needs to have a look." The day before, Henrietta went to the bathroom and found blood spotting her underwear. She filled her bathtub, lowered herself into the warm water, and spread her legs. With the door closed to her children, husband, and cousins, Henrietta slid a finger inside herself and rubbed it across her cervix until she found what she somehow knew she'd find: a hard lump, deep inside, as though someone had lodged a marble just to the left of the opening to her womb. Henrietta climbed out of the bathtub, dried herself off, and dressed. Then she told her husband, "You better take me to the doctor. I'm bleeding, and it ain't my time." Hopkins was one of the top hospitals in the country. It was built in 1889 as a charity hospital for the sick and poor, and it covered more than a dozen acres where a cemetery and insane asylum once sat in East Baltimore. The public wards at Hopkins were filled with patients, most of them Black, and unable to pay their medical bills. David drove Henrietta nearly 20 miles to get there, not because they preferred it, but because it was the only major hospital for miles that treated Black patients. This was the era of Jim Crow. When Black people showed up at white-only hospitals, the staff was likely to send them away, even if it meant they might die in the parking lot. Even Hopkins, which did treat Black patients, segregated them in colored wards and had colored-only fountains. So when the nurse called Henrietta from the waiting room, she led her through a single door to a colored-only exam room, one in a long row of rooms divided by clear glass walls that let nurses see from one to the next. Henrietta undressed, wrapped herself in a starched white hospital gown, and laid down on a wooden exam table, waiting for Howard Jones, the gynecologist on duty. Jones was thin and graying, his deep voice softened by a faint southern accent. He listened as Henrietta told him about the pain, the blood. She lay back on the table, feet pressed in stirrups as she stared at the ceiling, and sure enough, Jones found a lump exactly where she'd said he would. He described it as an eroded, hard mass, about the size of a nickel. He'd seen easily 1,000 cervical cancer lesions, but never anything like this. Shiny and purple, like grape jello, he wrote later, and so delicate it bled at the slightest touch. Jones cut a small sample and sent it to the pathology lab down the hall for diagnosis, then told Henrietta to go home. Soon after, he dictated notes about Henrietta. Her history is interesting in that she had a term delivery here at this hospital, September 19, 1950, he said. No note is made in the history at that time, or at the 6 weeks return visit, that there's any abnormality of the cervix. Yet here she was, just 3 months later, with a full-fledged tumor. Either her doctors had missed it during her last exams, which seemed impossible, or it had grown at a terrifying rate. So Henrietta went home, and a few days later she got a call saying that the biopsy came back as cervical cancer. She was 30 years old, and she had 5 kids at home. And they called her back in for what was the standard treatment of the day, which is radium therapy. And they would take tubes of radium, which is radioactive material,